When Verdi accepted the commission for his final opera, Falstaff, he was a man of 80, and he said that he couldn't be expected to compose more than 2 hours a day. And I'm up to now about 2, sometimes 3. I never start the music until the libretto is really completed. I start with what is the color of the scene. In this case, it was a given because it was the final scene of Shakespeare's Othello, which is the prologue to the opera. So that was already solved for me because it was a scene of great foreboding and violence. I really listen to the inner ear, and then I find what I'm hearing. The inner ear dictates exactly what it wants to hear, and it can suggest a new idea. It can correct something that it considers faulty or can be better. When things begin to come and come very naturally, and that inner ear is working for you, it can be very exhilarating. And then you have a very good day.
This is my life and the lives of others like me.
Workshops are very valuable for composers and librettists, and they should be, because it's the first time you see your opera on its feet. It can be reassuring, and also it can be very disturbing. It depends on how it runs and whether it's how close it is to your own concept of what it's going to look like. The aria I'm using of Margaret didn't turn out the way I had planned for it to, and now I'm having to reshape it, and also there are pitch differences that I want to attack, and that's a perfect tempo for that. The director and the conductor gave me very extensive lists of possible changes. The final decision on those is up to me, but nevertheless I take them very seriously and employ many of them. It becomes part of your technique as a composer to make that kind of an evaluation, because otherwise you can't go ahead.
My life is my art.
I was just very pleased to see it as a whole and to see just the tempo and the arc of the piece. When Verdi accepted the commission for his final opera, Falstaff,
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure to see you and to welcome you to the National Opera Center, either in person or by live stream. My name is Mark Skorka. I'm president of Opera America, and delighted to be here with the second installment of our series, Masters at Work, through which we are tracing the development of a new opera with the great Carlisle Floyd. A few words about this program. It is an extension of Opera America's decades-long commitment to supporting the creation and production of new opera. We have our New Works Forum, New Works Showcases, all of our granting programs through the Opera Fund. But this is a real opportunity to dissect the process, to learn about the process of creating a new opera. We're doing this in partnership with clusters of students at 5 university conservatories: the San Francisco Conservatory of Music, the University of Houston, the College Conservatory of Music in Cincinnati, Florida State University, and Wichita State University. So those students in those universities are connected to this live program via an internet link. They will be asking questions of us here on the stage. We have an audience here at the Opera Center who will also be asking questions. And the entire process is being live streamed globally, so an audience around the world can watch this, and it will also be archived. It is great to follow up our first segment, which occurred last month, when we talked about the identification of a subject and the creation of a libretto. Today we're going to be talking about the creation of the piano vocal score and piano vocal workshops. But first, I'm just kind of curious, Carlisle. Welcome.
Thank you.
Curious to know what you have been up to since the last time we were here together. Over the last month, what have you been doing on Prince of Players?
Revising and going and reviewing it to see if there's anything I want to change or that needs changing or alteration of any kind.
Have you been doing that in your studio, just working at the piano?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So you haven't been working with singers, but just yourself, your inner,
right.
your inner ear.
Yeah. Just being sure that the notes that are written are the notes that I want to sound.
And for the most part, are you pleased with it, or are you making significant changes at this point?
No, overall I'm quite pleased with it. And I say that with a lot of trepidation, but
sure, absolutely, justified trepidation. Yeah. What sorts of things do you change? Is it instrumentation? Is it a rhythm?
It can be a rhythm, or it can be. It's mostly pitches that I wanted to maybe alter in some way, or maybe an entire section that I want to rethink. And that can even go back to in one case, to actually bringing revising the libretto.
Really?
To new text.
So even at this point, you might change a word or change a line.
Oh yes. Not nearly as many in this opera as I guess the last two have had that. I don't know whether you say a virtue or a defect for that, but I think that's just a result of having done it for so long.
And I'm kind of curious. Of course, the piano vocal score will change as a result of these adjustments.
Yes.
And the orchestral parts and the conductor score will all change as these adjustments are made. Yes. Down to the wire.
Down to the wire. I spent time with my publisher yesterday here in New York, making some alterations with the editor there. So it may go on even longer, and once we get into rehearsal, who knows? I may find other things I want to make alterations with.
Okay, fair warning, fair warning. They may happen during rehearsal. So now on to today's topic, and I really do ask you these questions sincerely because I do get somewhat confused, although perhaps the answers are very individual. But in speaking about the piano vocal score, I guess not all composers do it the same way. Some people go to full score and then reduce that to piano vocal. You start at the piano and start with the piano vocal. Is that correct?
Yes.
And why is it that you do it that way?
It's because I'm trained as a pianist, which is the main thing that I did until my late 20s. So I mean, I think my danger is thinking too pianistically and not thinking orchestrally enough in the actual procedure. But it's not a very big problem, or hasn't been in the past. But I think it gives you a very quick insight into what the orchestration is going to be, to do your own score at the piano.
And of course, in beginning to work with singers and beginning to talk to producers about the work, you need the piano vocal score.
Absolutely.
To start the musical conversation.
Without it, really. And if I didn't do it myself, I would have to hire somebody to do it, or do it again afterwards. But I mean, it would be the same thing in the long run. I would still be doing a piano vocal score.
Once the orchestration is done, do you go back and adjust the piano vocal score because the orchestration has just changed the way you would represent the piece in the piano vocal?
If there are changes of pitch, changes of sections, yes, I do go back.
But you don't try to change it pianistically to make it more consistent with what's happening in the orchestration, or?
No.
Okay.
No.
So it is about pitch, it's about rhythm.
Yeah, it's about musical values.
There was a question from Wichita State, and that is, when creating the piano vocal score, do you think about the pianist? Do you think about what the pianist can play? And I saw just now in the video that you actually do play it yourself. So
yes.
You clearly are thinking about, can the pianist play this?
Yes. Although when I'm writing, I don't really think of that. There was a passage that we just heard of a very fast passage down the keyboard. Now, in the score, that's a double passage. There's a bass line underneath that. I wasn't brave enough to try that.
Right.
And
you can get away with it because you're Carlisle Floyd.
Yeah,
you go, yeah, da 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 da. But the pianists actually have to play it.
For all those wrong notes, I could say, well, I'm sorry, that's what I hear. You know? And that's usually the end of any argument with a composer.
Oh, I'm sure it is. So there are some admittedly difficult parts in the piano vocal score.
Yes. Not all that many. There have been more in other operas of mine, but this has its share.
So are you aware in the moment that you're causing pianists you're causing future pianists heartburn?
I've never thought of it quite that way. I think of it really, this is what I want to hear, and it's up to your training to present it.
Absolutely. You know, if it weren't for Liszt, no one would be able to play Beethoven piano sonatas. So there you are. We know from our last conversation, and even from something that you said in this video, that you don't start composing until the libretto is done.
That's right. It
may not be 100% done, but it's done. So do you begin by creating a kind of musical framework, a storyboard, a musical storyboard? Do you have a sense of the length of each scene or the arc of the orchestration? How do you set out to compose the opera? Do you just go measure by measure, page by page?
Oh yeah, I really do. And I do that from the first day. Just work from the piano vocal score. And if I quickly encounter places I want to alter, I do it. But of course, I go back and make permanent changes with those.
But when you're setting out even to create the piano vocal score,
yeah,
do you know thematically, motivically, how you want to structure it? Or again, is it just a process of page by page discovery as you go through the creation?
It's the latter,
really?
Mostly with me, but I mean, always with the idea that you've got to think in large arcs. And if your libretto is well constructed, so that those arcs are very apparent in the libretto. In other words, by arcs we mean actually high points of tension, or alteration in the action in libretto or whatever. And we know we have to get to those and give them special attention. That they have to have special thematic material. And also that, I mean, as a composer, that you're setting up something that you will probably be using again.
So that you might get to scene 3 and decide in the middle of scene 3 that it's the time to reuse a theme from scene 1. You haven't planned in advance that you're going to use that theme again in scene 3, but when you're in scene 3, that idea occurs to you.
Yes.
Okay.
You have that on the shelf, as it were. If it seems appropriate then to bring it in for a repetition or an alteration, then you do it. You don't have too many of those thematic materials, but you make very good use of them. and they should be pegged with moments on the stage.
Say more about that. So here you're becoming a stage director.
Yeah. Well, I've done that too.
Uh-huh.
No, it's just what I'm saying is that if it's connected with, let's say, in romantic music, it's a love scene that you've come up with a theme to underline all of this. Then in future moments that you want some memory of this or some reference to it, you have that to draw on to alter. Usually I do it in a different guise.
Mm-hmm.
But the source of it is the same.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think the astute listener is aware of that. He may not know exactly, but I think it'll have the feeling with him of him or her of having heard part of that before,
mm-hmm.
or in a
mm-hmm.
different way, or an alteration.
You mentioned in the video again about determining the color of a scene. And I'm curious to know what you mean by that phrase and then how you do it. So what do you mean by the color of a scene?
Well, it's interesting you should bring that up, because that's where I really wanted to start today, with the color of the scene, because it's not my term, it's Verdi's term. He called it La Tinta. Mm-hmm. And he was constantly saying to his librettist, what is La Tinta of the scene? Mm-hmm. What is the color of the scene? That is all so important, because if you're an aware composer, that can give you your cue for what you want musically, and then you feed the brain and use it again, and it may be used in a slightly different way, or the La Tinta may have changed. Red may have changed to purple.
Now, my guess is that you're not really talking about a color as on the spectrum of red or purple or green.
No.
What are some of the descriptive words that are in your mind when you're thinking about La Tinta of a scene? Is it, somber?
Yeah.
What are some of those words?
It could be somber. It could be to the point of being funereal. Mm-hmm. It could be very, very full of suspense, which is another very strong color to write music about and for. Or it could be a love scene. Mm-hmm.
And you try to remain fairly consistent to that color within the scene, so that mm-hmm. the scene is kind of almost an identifiable
and it should be
unit.
Identifiable when it reappears, or when it is altered. But I don't think it's a good idea to alter it to the point that it's not recognizable in any form. I don't know whether I made that clear or not. Mm-hmm. But let's say that your thematic idea is 12 measures long. Well, then you may want to use three measures of that, mm-hmm. and then maybe alter that.
Right.
So it's something constantly fulfilling itself. But the La Tinta is let me tell you how else that I see it, that I think it's very important. And that Verdi was on to something very solid. I think he's a very good example of it, at the risk of sounding patronizing. But what does it do for you as a composer to think in terms of color? Well, I think it definitely, as soon as you have the color of the scene, you have the rhythm of the scene. Mm-hmm. You have the length of phrases. You have the whole idea of how fast the scene is going to progress. But it's basically is giving you your underlying emotional atmosphere. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's what we're talking about. Yeah. And as soon as you say that, then that suggests something to you in terms of beat, mm-hmm. in terms of rhythmic length,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, it makes perfect sense. You know, if you're using something that's funereal as opposed to celebratory,
Yeah,
just it evokes all kinds of instrumentation. It invokes rhythm. Absolutely, as you say, length of phrase.
I recommend this very much with students, and because I use it for myself,
Mm-hmm.
obviously. But if I'm stuck, in other words, if no thematic material occurs to me, I say, well, what is the color of the scene?
Mm-hmm.
And usually, if I get down to rather basic words with it, then I can get myself out of the bog.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think it's a very good tool to have if you're working with students. If they come to you and you say, no, music is suggesting itself. And I will say, well, is the problem the color of the scene?
Mm-hmm.
Or is there no visible color in the scene?
Yeah.
Has it not taken a definite emotional point of view?
It's fascinating. When you begin,
I hope that's clear.
It is, very clear. When you begin composing, how much do you imagine the characters musically, individually? You certainly know the voice type, that Ralph is a tenor and Jim is a baritone. Does each character have for you a range or a rhythm, a musical signature in some fashion? I'm not talking about a motive or a theme, but just that the musical character of the individual. Do you start out thinking about them individually that way?
Yeah, I think it becomes almost automatic. If you know your characters that well to begin with, you just wouldn't deviate from that character in terms of rhythm or in terms of, let's say, pitch range.
Mm-hmm.
If it's somebody, let's say, very wrought up and angry, well, you would start out by giving yourself a long range of pitches because you would need it. You could do it just hammering on one note as well to get the same effect. But I don't know whether that answers your question or not.
It does. And my sense is that you get to know your characters very well, of course, writing the libretto.
Yes.
So that by the time you start composing, you know these characters pretty well.
Yes.
And that you probably have already imagined some musical signature for them, even as you're writing the libretto.
Mm-hmm. Or quality of music.
Mm-hmm. Quality of music.
It doesn't have to be the exact thematic material that you end up with.
But quality of music.
But it probably will.
Yeah. Even if you don't know your cast, when you're composing, do you compose for a particular singer in mind? Like, I know that singer, and this is what that instrument could do? Or do you generalize to what a soprano can do or what a tenor can do?
You don't generalize.
Okay.
Because the character, if the character is well known to you, you know from the beginning what the vocal type is.
Mm-hmm.
And that already hems you into a range. And you can violate that to a certain extent, or extend it. Let's say that's a better term than violate. But you can extend it, but you're not going to give him something out of his range.
So that you might say to yourself, well, gee, this is a role that I could imagine Patricia Racette singing, and you know what that voice, what her voice can do. Yeah. So you think about that singer as you're composing some.
No, to tell you the honest truth, I think about the character.
Okay.
I had a conversation. I don't think Patricia would mind my saying this, because she did the lead in my next to the last opera wonderfully, because she's a great artist. And all the time she was preparing for the opera, she would write me little notes or call me and tell me that now my voice lies best in this part of the mid-range or the upper middle. It got to be very precise. Mm-hmm. And I've never done that. You know, mm-hmm. I don't mm-hmm. think in those terms mm-hmm. at all. And So when we started rehearsal, the first day she came up to me and she says, you know, all of those admonitions I've been sending you through my letters and phone calls. I said, yes. I said, but Patricia, I write for a character. I don't write for a voice. She says, great. She says, you know enough not to listen to a dumb soprano.
Right, so
that was the end of it. We never had any more conversation about it.
That's wonderful. There was a question from the Moore School at University of Houston, and this was from a voice teacher there. And the question was, how do you think about a singer's breathing? Do you leave it up to the singer to figure out where to take a breath, or do you think about the breath of the singer in creating the singer's music?
Well, to an extent, surely, yeah. I don't think about it that much when I'm writing, though. I feel like if it's a well-trained singer, that person will know exactly when to breathe and under what circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
But I try to write with that in mind and not overextend the singer in terms of breath.
Right, so there's no wicked little glee at, let's see if they can get to the end of that phrase.
No. No, you're not doing yourself a favor if you do that. They may not get to the end of the phrase.
So it's a combination of being thoughtful about the singer, but also relying on the singer's professionalism to figure it out, too.
That's right. You know, that's interesting, Mark, because I don't think I've ever had a breath battle with a singer.
Mm-hmm.
Or they may have mentioned it to me as something they had to work on particularly. But most singers are very, I find, very, just very, what's the word I'm looking for? Very, really well supplied with experience to know how much to allow in terms of breath, or how to cheat and get a catch breath at a certain point.
Right. Now I see Laura Lee flagging me for some questions, and I'm going to switch gears in a moment. So let me take a couple of questions. One from Florida State University, please. Hello there.
Hi.
Tell us who you are and ask your question, please.
I'm Noah Nethery, a composition major at FSU, and I believe I'm asking this question on behalf of Robert, who is right behind me. His question is, how much liberty do you give to word stress when writing out the rhythm of the vocal line, and how much planning do you do when creating the rhythm from the libretto?
Let's break that into two questions. So one is about word stress, and how much liberty do you take in composing when you're dealing with word stress and the natural syllables of the language?
I try not to take any. Word stress is just a real a basic factor in good diction, and if you start altering word stress, you can surely very quickly find yourself in bad trouble.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's where we've talked about this before. I mean, that's where that old word prosody comes in. If the prosody is good, that is the right syllable and under the right stress, then that shouldn't be a problem.
The other part of your question, sir?
The other part is, how much planning do you do when creating the rhythm from the libretto?
How much planning do you do when you create the rhythm from the libretto?
Well, the planning comes more in the actual composing. And in other words, if I start a section and I have a thematic idea already, it begins to generate itself. uh, and extend itself. So I almost instinctively know how long that's going to be extended. But given the nature of the thematic idea, given where it is in the action, but that's a very important consideration, and dramatically, word stress. And also, as we said earlier, I think in the previous session, it's very difficult, bad prosody, for singers to surmount that if that's working against the natural emphases in their own language.
Great.
I don't know whether I answered that.
Did that get to the question? I see a head nodding there. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
You and I touched on this in our last session. We both define opera as occasionally leaving the words behind and conveying the character, conveying the emotion of the situation musically. And the words are a stepping off point, but the music takes the emotion further. How do you know when you've gotten to that point? Do you say, well, it's 30 pages of music, I better get some great arcing phrases in here, or do you feel it out because you know that this scene is going to be a somber scene, so you need to have the music portray that beyond the words? How do you decide when the music takes over?
Well, this is going to sound a little evasive, and I don't mean for it to, but it usually dictates itself. And you usually know when you're in one of those arcs, if let's say you do the first phrase, the second phrase, the third phrase, you already have your impetus for that. So that it's very not easy, because nothing is ever easy, but it's like taking jumps. And it's usually a matter of pitch and also breath and what the intervals are going to be. But because if you're into a phrase, in other words, developing a phrase, you're going to continue to use aspects of that phrase, be they intervals or be they just rhythmic pattern or whatever. But I mean, that's what gives it its increasing tension. To restate that in different guises until you reach the climactic point. I'm thinking of such a place in my new opera. And I knew exactly when I hit it, and I hit the top phrase first. So my job was then to build towards that, so that came as the peak.
Wow.
It's her confession of love for him.
Yeah.
And it bursts out of her, but then that leads you into an aria. In which she says that she has been in love with him for a great long time, and then she becomes more and more involved in that confession until she takes it even higher the second time, and saying that she loves him.
Do you ever have to compose?
I hope that wasn't too murky, but
no. Do you ever have to compose backward, where you've gotten to a musical point that you love, but it's like, ooh, I got here too fast. I need to go backward and get to this point.
You don't have the tension built yet.
Yeah. So you do sometimes have to go backward and rebuild.
Yeah.
There's a question from San Francisco. San Francisco Conservatory, please come in. Great. Tell us who you are.
Hi, I'm Konstantinos from San Francisco, and my question is, do you find when writing that there are any predictable ways in which the stage directions and the physical action actually can affect the contour of a vocal line?
Good question. So this is very much about how much of the stage direction you do, and whether in imagining some of the stage movement that has impact on actual vocal lines.
Tell you the truth, I never think of that. I figure that's up to the stage director. And if the singer has a problem with that, in other words, if he's asked to do something physically that interferes with his vocal apparatus, I think he should simply tell the stage director, I think we need to make an adjustment here. But I'm not sure I understand the exact meaning of the question, although I think it's a good one.
And I'm interpreting it here, and our colleague in San Francisco will correct me. But what I heard the question to be, do you go so far as to imagine the stage direction such that you are allowing for physical activity that might occur? And I'm hearing Carlisle's answer being no, that he writes the music he hears for the color of the scene, for the quality of that character, and it's up to the stage director then to move people around.
Yeah, that's right.
Did I get your question correct?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks. Carlisle, in the creation of the piano vocal score, I want to say you must have some ideas about the orchestration.
Oh, yeah.
How do you make note of those? How do you keep track of those ideas?
Well, I really don't. But I will know pretty definitely what I'm going to do orchestrally at given points. And if you stop me and ask me, now, what about this measure, I probably could tell you if I understood what surrounded it. In other words, what came from, where it came from.
And if you, in that phrase you were describing where she expresses her love, and when you got to that phrase and said, this is what I was waiting for, and you heard it with flutes and French horns, you don't have a yellow pad where you say flutes and French horns on page 44.
No, I trust myself to remember that when I get there, I'll still know.
You'll still, exactly, you'll still feel that. The workshop process is one that's very important to you. And you wanted to, I know, talk a good bit about the workshop process. So when you have a piano vocal workshop, what are you listening for?
Well, the word that occurred to me is flow. To see if it moves the way I think it moves. That I'm speaking of the entire opera. That's my first concern. That is constantly moving and accumulating as it goes. And accumulating by that I mean dramatic tension. But I think that would. What was your question again?
When you're in a piano vocal workshop, what are you listening for?
Well, that would be the first thing. Then also, did scenes play out in a given amount of time, or did they overextend themselves? But that's also a part of that flow we're talking about. But it's very easy to take too long to get to a head of steam, so to speak, musically, in which you can dissipate some of that tension before you ever get to the top of the phrase or whatever it is. But you don't want that. You want that all to come out very naturally and not seem overextended or underbuilt.
Right, or rushed somehow, yeah. Or rushed.
Yes, exactly.
Now, in the video and in our own chatting before we began, you talked about an aria that you're working on, an aria that didn't turn out as you thought it would. Did you discover that in the workshop?
No, to be honest, I knew there was problems before the workshop. I think that in the workshop it showed me that it was not as troublesome as I had imagined it would be.
And what does it mean to you that the aria didn't turn out as you thought?
Well, that vocal lines had a real kind of elegance about them, which is what I always strive for, or that a section didn't reach its peak at a certain time or a given time, or too soon or too late, or that you're overbuilding too soon. That's a dangerous one.
Jane earlier on said that you were sort of stuck.
Yes.
And what does it mean to be stuck? And then how do you unstick yourself?
Well, you start out with hope.
Yeah, with optimism.
But no, to be stuck is to have no musical ideas come to your head. Now, frequently musical ideas come to your head, the best ones come to your head when you're not even thinking about it. You're working, and this just flows, it just goes. But when that goes and there's no such thing showing itself in your brain, then you know you're stuck. And what I do, as I said a while ago, with students and myself, is to say, what is the color of this scene? What do I really want here? What's missing? And really try to analyze your way out of it. And it usually works, thank goodness.
So that the color of a scene, and getting back to that basic thought, can free you up for an aria within that scene. You can go back to that color and think about what it is you want to convey.
Yes. I'll give you an example of the one I'm talking about. I originally wrote it to start out piano, and just making a mistake, miscalculation. When I came back to it, and I thought, well, this is much more impassioned than I had given it credit for being, and so therefore I'm going to get to the peak of this phrase sooner, or this peak of these several phrases. But the point is that I start out at a higher level of attention, and that's what happened.
You also mentioned adjusting pitches, and how would you adjust pitches to make that aria more effective?
Well, it depends if I determine on where the peak of the aria is, which I should. And usually can. But if I know that, then I can pretty much say, well, this is too slow in building, or it overbuilds. That's a very big temptation of young composers. They overbuild too soon. They don't really earn their place in the music. It's the same thing in building towards your act endings. That's something that takes great skill and, what's the word for it? Calculation. And you can overbuild. In other words, you can get to the ending of the act before you really earned it. And then what you've done is to shortchange yourself in the effectiveness of the act ending.
And then it keeps ending.
And then it's just it's kind of hopeless, because once you start doing that, you lose momentum forward.
Yeah. There's a question from Wichita State. Let's go to Wichita. Hello. What's your question?
The question is, as you are composing in your inner ear, you talked about the colors that you hear. Do you hear specific instruments or specific keys? A lot of composers in the past associate keys and instruments with particular emotions.
Talking about your inner ear and what you're hearing, are you hearing keys? Are you hearing instrumentation? What do you hear in that inner ear?
I hear phrases, or parts of phrases, or melodic idea, something that will generate further material. And I make a decision as to whether what I have come up with is really complete in itself, or does it need more material? Is the material full of enough promise of extension and finally explosion or whatever. That's the kind of thing I concern myself with, though.
In the notes we exchanged going back and forth before this session, you said that you feel that a lot of young composers don't know how to make use of a piano vocal workshop, that they are, I guess, so thrilled to be hearing the work that they don't take advantage of the opportunity. Can you explain some more what you mean by that?
Well, I've seen it, and it happened. And I've also been very careful with myself in a workshop that I don't get so completely wrapped up in the unfolding of this child of mine that I forget to listen critically. And I think that what you have to do is to really sit back from what you're and if possible, ask to hear the music first by itself.
Without movement.
Well, I mean, with singers, but the point is with no staging.
Right.
Then that gets it down to its bare bones. And so then you're not seduced by the actual addition of the staging. But the point is that the addition of the staging is very important because it tells you whether it's working in tandem with the music or not. Is that what I said?
Yeah.
What I meant was, is it working in terms of where the music is going, what the music is saying?
The idea of critical listening in a workshop, and you say in the first workshop, if you can, do it without staging, so you're just hearing the music. Yet you're the one who has put every note on the page.
Yes.
You know where it's supposed to be going. You hear all of the little treatments of whatever thematic material you have. How do you bring objectivity to that room to listen to the music for the first time?
Well, I can certainly say one thing, definitely. You better bring it with you.
I agree you should.
Because once you get in there, it's very easily to be caught up with the excitement of the moment and to supply what's not there, perhaps. It's better if you can hear the music by itself first. And if you can, then once it starts unfolding on the stage with stage movement, you are not as likely to be carried along with it. But you have to constantly be very, very self-critical.
Do you have
and not think isn't that beautiful, or isn't that lovely, or whatever?
Do you have some people you listen to as trusted extra ears?
Yes, I've had those. I started over one of my, I think, best operas because my good friends and critics all said to me that it was a bore. And that's the one thing I don't allow myself. I mean, is boring an audience. I mean, our first responsibility is to keep an audience involved. And I said once in an interview for the New York Times, which they picked up, it just came spontaneously out for me, and I just simply said, I don't want an audience to nod. And I don't. If they have, then you've lost their absorption in the stage for you at that moment.
And again, that critical thinking that you bring into the room, I guess you just have to separate yourself from having created it. You have to bring
You don't even think about
your critical faculties to bear.
That's all you bring with you. You can certainly be very pleased that a passage turns out as well as you hoped it would, or better. Those are delightful moments. but you can't be too seduced by them
Mm-hmm.
without saying what their position is in the whole scene
Mm-hmm.
or group of phrases or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't lose your perspective.
Laura Lee tells me we have a question again from Wichita State, so let's fly back to Wichita.
Well, I was just curious if after you've created an opera, but before rehearsals start, have you ever had a singer come to you, a singer who's going to be doing premiere, and request that a section of something or something be rewritten?
Have you ever between the completion of the opera and the beginning of rehearsal period, had a singer come to you to request adjustments that might suit them or other adjustments?
No, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't think so.
Sam, did you have lots of adjustments you wanted to ask for but didn't? Please cut the soprano aria in Act 2. A question that came from Florida State University. In your own work at piano vocal workshops, what have you needed to change most frequently? If there is a pattern to your workshops, something that you might fall into a pattern of doing that has to be corrected, what has to be corrected most often for you as a composer?
I would say for me, it's a very simple thing and a very difficult thing. It is just to constantly be aware of, is the phrase or the series of phrases or the whole section building properly, or is it being retarded, held back for some reason, or is it overbuilt? And that's what you have to keep first and foremost when you're listening to it the first time. Has this gone on too long? Has it gone on long enough? Have I built to what I started out by promising?
If someone had to make an error, is it better to take too long and to have to trim it? Or is it better to go too fast and have to slow it down?
Oh, first.
Okay.
Yeah. That's easier to correct.
Much easier to trim it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
a good question, though.
I would always prefer a singer sing sharp because it's easier to get to the pitch. If a singer's singing flat, they're probably never going to get to the pitch.
I don't particularly enjoy either one.
Right. So yeah, overwrite and then
but
trim.
I agree.
Yeah, overwrite and then trim. It's easier. It's easier
That's
to do.
right.
The questions from the universities and conservatories will continue to flow, but I did want to turn to our audience, because I haven't yet turned to you, to see whether you have any questions for Carlisle about the piano vocal score, about the workshop process. Please, and if you stand at the microphone, tell us who you are. We'll be able to hear you in Wichita, San Francisco, and elsewhere around the world.
Hi, my name is Stephanie. So I'm listening to you talk about your craft and your art, and I think it's clear to everybody that you're a master of this craft in composing and listening and music. You know instinctually when something needs to be expanded or perhaps cut back. And I wanted to know, as a person, or maybe as an artist, but maybe the most fundamental question is, as a person, where does this come from in you, where you just instinctually know when it's right and when it's not right?
That's a great question, and I was frankly thinking the same thing, that so much of what you talk about, Carlisle, is led by your inner ear, your intuition, your taste. And I know from prior interviews that you've always been a man of the theater, and you love theater as a young person. You were informed by theater. But how does one develop the intuitive facility that you clearly display?
Do you know any other difficult questions? I should say impossible questions. I don't know.
Did you have it when you wrote Susanna?
Oh yes, yeah. I never looked back in Susanna.
So it's a gift.
It's an instinct.
You have an instinct about it. And that's what makes you have a career as a composer. I suppose if you want to write but don't have the instinct, you should go do something else.
Yes, it's very interesting because I've always had composers who came to me to work do their own librettos. Maybe I mentioned this before, but I think it's worth mentioning again in this context. And not that they become librettists, but that they know what to require of a librettist. Because it's such a rarefied art, writing librettos. It has its own particular its own particular
demands and
demands. But now I've lost my train of thought.
You've had composers come to you and talking about this intuitive lead and with the libretto, writing their own libretto or working with a librettist.
Yes, but as I said, I have them do it just simply to understand what is required. But the thing is that I've had some that did very good librettos and did not have the musical instinct to put with them. And that's very, very sad. Really is, because they develop the important and difficult thing is the libretto's construction. And then to get to the music, and the music is dead.
Well, you should tell us who they are, because we need more good librettists. But what you've also told us is about the gift of the composer, is about the instinct, the intuition, that inner ear that has to be present for a composer to succeed. And it is unfortunately something, it can be refined in study, but that can't be taught. That kind of instinct and intuition. Well, we are at the end of our time today. We've enjoyed visiting Houston and Cincinnati and Wichita and Florida State University and San Francisco. It's been a pleasure to be with you here in the room at the National Opera Center today, but above all, a great pleasure to be with Carlisle Floyd. Again, Carlisle, thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.
We'll be back again in January.
Thank you.
Thank you, as always. Thank you.
Very good.